He handed me a paper plate. Everyone else had china. "Just for tonight," he said, not looking me in the eye. "It's easier for clean-up." They were all in the dining room, laughing, passing gravy boats, slicing warm rolls with real silverware. I sat in the den, alone, next to the old heater that clicked like a nervous clock. I balanced the plate on my knees, listening to the murmur of a family I raised, from the other side of a wall. Above the mantel, a for-sale flyer still hung. Forgotten. But I hadn't forgotten. Some plates don't break, they just quietly disappear from the table. You don't become invisible all at once. It's slow, gentle, like dusk. I was raised to be pleasant, not remarkable. Politeness was prized more than truth. I learned early that softness made people stay, and silence kept the peace. My mother used to say, "Don't trouble the water if the boat's floating." And so I spent decades making sure no one rocked the boat, even when I wanted to leap out of it. I met Robert when I was 21. He was dependable, quiet, and came from a good family. He didn't sweep me off my feet. He set me down gently and built a life around us. I took his last name like a pressed flower between pages, delicate, preserved, not meant to be opened too often. When our son Mark was born, everything inside me rearranged. I remember the moment they laid him in my arms, this squirming, howling little soul with eyes still swollen from birth. I remember thinking, "You're my reason now." And he was. I stayed home while Robert worked. I made baby food from scratch, read parenting books until the pages curled. I wasn't perfect, but I tried. Lord, I tried. Mark was a sweet boy, curious, wide-eyed, always asking questions. When he was sick, I slept beside his crib on the floor. When he had nightmares, he wouldn't sleep unless my hand was on his back. There's a sound that stays with you as a mother, the sound of your child calling for you in the dark. And when it stops, when they stop needing you, it's louder than any scream. By the time Mark was in middle school, Robert had settled into himself like a man in an old coat, comfortable but quiet. We had a rhythm. He handled the bills. I handled everything else. My dreams, art school, travel, even learning the violin, became a list I folded up and tucked in the back of the pantry, next to unused cookbooks and childhood report cards. I wasn't resentful, not at first. Sacrifice felt noble when Mark was young. I saw every packed lunch and folded towel as a kind of love letter. My purpose was simple: make life easier for them, but purpose has a way of hollowing you out if it's only ever about other people. I joined a knitting circle at the church. Once a week, we gathered in the basement and talked about arthritis, grandchildren, and our favourite episodes of murder, she wrote. I liked those women. They saw me. One of them, Carol, asked once, "What do you do just for yourself?" I blinked. I didn't know how to answer. "I guess I bake," I offered. "For others or for you?" she pressed. That question stayed with me. It still does. Even so, I stayed in my lane. I made holiday meals from scratch, mailed birthday cards early, kept the house clean, and my temper cleaner. Robert never cheated, but he never really asked how I was either. After 40 years of marriage, we were friendly strangers who shared a bed and a lawnmower. And then Robert passed. Quietly. In his sleep. The grief was steady and private. I mourned the life we'd built more than the man himself. What do you do with a lifetime of small disappointments that now feel too late to address? You pack up his slippers, donate his books, and learn how to sleep on just one side of the bed. Mark was kind at first. He helped with paperwork, brought meals, called every few days. But slowly the calls thinned out. Visits shortened. Grandkids got busier. His wife, Lisa, was always polite, but polite like you are to someone who overstays. I kept the house. I kept baking. I kept smiling when they showed up late and left early. One autumn evening, I found a photo album tucked behind some old board games. Inside was a picture of me and Mark. He couldn't have been older than 5. We were on a porch swing, both of us laughing so hard my eyes were shut. He used to say, "Mama, I don't want to eat unless you sit next to me." And I always did. Always. That's who I was, the woman who sat beside everyone else, making sure. Their plates were full while hers grew cold. But lately, that photo began to feel less like a memory and more like a reminder of a person I used to be, before my seat at the table became conditional. I gave him everything I had, and then taught him how to take it, and the worst part? I thought that was love. It's strange to walk through a house you designed with your own hands and realise none of it truly belongs to you. I wasn't a builder in the literal sense. I didn't lift walls or lay tile, but I picked every curtain, scrubbed every baseboard, and chose every scent that made the rooms feel warm. Vanilla in the fall, lemon in the spring, clove during Christmas. That was me, the atmosphere maker, the home maker, the quiet centre of a spinning wheel. Robert liked order. He wanted dinner on the table by 6, the TV turned low and the towels folded the right way, which meant his way. He didn't hit or yell, he just expected, and I provided. Mark followed his father's quiet rules more than my soft voice. He learned how to put his napkin in his lap, how to speak when spoken to, how to excel. I encouraged the arts, but Robert believed in structure, math, sports, practicality. So I clapped from the bleachers and put away my sketchpad. I remember one, spring day, I must have been in my 40s, when I saw an ad for a weekend watercolour retreat. Just women, cabins, painting under trees. My chest tightened with want. I clipped the ad and tucked it behind the phone book. I found it again, 3. Years later, while looking for a takeout menu, unopened, unused, like so many parts of me, my daily life was devoted to others. I kept a binder of Mark's medical records, never missed a dentist appointment, knew his favourite snacks, and the names of all his middle school teachers. I sewed his Halloween costumes until Lisa told me, kindly but firmly, "We're ordering them this year. It's easier." I nodded and smiled, even as I felt my usefulness slipping like a dishcloth through water. After Robert's heart attack scare in his early 60s, I became a nurse in my own home. Low-sodium meals, morning pill schedules, calendar reminders. He survived. But something in me shifted. I started waking up at 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling, wondering, is this it? We were a good team, by most standards. No fights, no affairs. Just enduring. And there's a kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people who don't see you anymore. Sometimes I'd stand in front of the bathroom mirror and whisper, "Hello!" just to see if I still had a voice. After Robert died, I thought, maybe now I can breathe, but old habits don't die with husbands. I turned my attention to Mark and his family, babysat the grandkids twice a week, stocked their pantry with snacks, helped with drop-offs and pick-ups. I even moved my things out of the guest bedroom so the kids could have their play space when they visited. When Lisa forgot to thank me, I assumed she was tired. When Mark missed Mother's Day one year, I told myself, he's busy, they're raising a family. I excused and excused until the excuses formed their own wallpaper. Familiar, forgettable, always there. The house I lived in felt like a museum curated for everyone else's comfort. The den was Robert's space. The upstairs guest rooms belonged to the grandkids now. Even the kitchen, once my sanctuary, became neutral ground. Lisa would come in and subtly rearrange the pantry, swap out spices, comment on my old-fashioned measuring cups. I smiled and said nothing, because that's what I'd always done. There was a moment, an ordinary Wednesday, when I was sweeping under the dining table. The sun was coming through the blinds in long, broken lines. I paused, leaned on the broom, and realised I couldn't remember the last time anyone had asked me what I wanted, what I truly wanted. That question felt foreign, like asking the wallpaper. How it felt about the furniture. The most painful part of being needed is realising that once the need is gone, so are you. Still, I kept showing up. Dropping off banana bread, buying school supplies, smiling through vague text replies and late arrivals. Mark never meant to hurt me, I don't think, but sometimes neglect isn't active, it's passive, a slow drifting away. Like a rowboat untied from the dock, gliding out farther and farther until you can barely see it anymore. And I was the dock. Still. Steady. Forgettable. I'd built my entire identity around service, around giving, around being a dependable yes. But every yes had cost me something, a little dream here, a boundary there, a breath I didn't take, a song I never sang, and the cruelest irony, no one noticed. I gave away my life in teaspoons, one stir, one scoop, one favour at a time, and no one ever thought to ask if I was hungry too. It wasn't an explosion, it was a click, a soft, almost imperceptible change in the air, like when a bird stops, singing and you're not sure why, only that you've gone still, waiting. That day started like most others. I'd baked my grandson's favourite muffins, banana chocolate chip, still warm. I wrapped them in foil and drove them to Mark's house. I didn't call ahead. I never needed to. I had the garage code, a key, and years of history that told me I was welcome. Lisa was at the kitchen island, phone pressed to her ear. Mark was in the living room, laptop open. The kids were watching cartoons. I smiled. I brought something sweet. She looked up, blinked like she hadn't heard me enter, and then covered the mouthpiece. Actually, would you mind not giving them treats today? I'm trying to cut back on sugar. We're doing this new program at school. I nodded, folded the foil tighter. Of course. She didn't thank me. Just turned back to her call. Mark looked over briefly and gave me a distracted wave. Hey, Mum. Sorry, crazy day. Can you give us a few minutes? I stood there for a second, holding a tray of muffins no one wanted, and realised I was an interruption. Not a guest, not family, a disruption in their routine. I placed the muffins on the counter and slipped out. No one noticed. Back home, I left the tray untouched on the table. It sat there until nightfall, when I finally slid it into the fridge with shaking hands. I didn't cry. But I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the tile I'd once handpicked with Robert. Almond cream with tiny flecks of gold. I'd called it sunlight caught in stone. He'd said, if you like it, that's fine. Everything. Had always been, if you like it, that's fine. But somewhere along the way, even my preferences had become invisible. The next day, I noticed my favourite coffee mug had a chip in the rim. I'd used that mug for over 2 decades, navy blue with faded white lettering, Best Mom, 1994. I set it down carefully and opened the cabinet, reaching for another. It was gone. All my old mugs had been replaced with matching white ceramic ones. Sleek. Modern. Lisa's doing, I assumed. They'd slowly updated the kitchen, one drawer at a time, until the space no longer bore my fingerprints. It was still my house, technically, but it didn't feel like mine. That evening, I went into the garage looking for a folding chair to sit outside. That's when I found it. The dining room chair with the broken leg. It was mine. My spot at the table. The E1 I always sat in. The leg had splintered at the bottom, uneven and jagged. Instead of being repaired or replaced with care, it had been shoved into the corner like a wounded animal no one had time to nurse. I touched the seat gently. The fabric was worn where my hands used to rest. I remembered the feel of that chair, beneath me during birthdays, quiet dinners, and long nights when I stayed up waiting for Mark to come home from high school dances. No one had told me it broke. No one had asked if I was okay not sitting there anymore. They had simply made the decision for me. That was the click. The quiet realisation that I had been moved without consent from centre to corner. A few days later, Mark called. Not to check on me. He wanted to know if I could watch the kids an extra day. I said yes. I always said yes. But I hung up the phone. Stood in the hallway and thought, what if I didn't? It wasn't anger that came first. It was grief. Grief for the woman I had been. For the way I'd poured myself into every meal, every car ride, every whispered prayer by a sick child's bed, and how none of it had created permanence. It was not the foundation. I was the scaffolding. Useful until the structure could stand without me. I walked back into the kitchen and stood before the corkboard by the fridge. It was cluttered with expired coupons, a local church bulletin, and Lisa's neatly pinned weekly calendar. Tucked behind a flyer for a lost cat was something else, folded, soft from age, a real estate flyer. I'd picked it up months ago while walking near the park. It had a photo of a small coastal home, white porch swing, faded blue shutters. I'd stopped and stared at it for longer than I meant to. I'd taken it out of curiosity, then shamefully hidden it. I unfolded it again, looked at the photo. Imagined waking up to the sound of gulls, making coffee without worrying about who needed what, walking barefoot across a floor that belonged to me. Just me. That chair in the garage wasn't just broken, it was a message. You're not needed. At this table anymore. But maybe I didn't need that table either. It's never just one thing. It's 100 tiny paper cuts in the same spot, until even a breeze stings. After that day in the garage with the broken chair, I started noticing more. Not new things, things that had been happening for a long time. I'd just stopped pretending. They didn't matter. There was the vacation I wasn't invited to. Mark and Lisa took the kids to Maine for a week. I only found out when Lisa posted a photo on social media, everyone smiling on a rocky beach wrapped in sweaters. When I asked about it gently, Mark said, "We didn't want to burden you with travel." Burden. I remembered packing diaper bags and luggage for 3, driving 6 hours to visit Robert's parents, staying up all night with a feverish toddler in a hotel bathroom. I never considered any of it a burden. Then there was the birthday I spent alone, my 68th. Mark called around. 7:45 that evening. "Hey, sorry, totally lost track of time. Hope it was a good one." I lied and said it was. I didn't tell him I'd made a pot roast just in case they came by. I didn't tell him I'd worn lipstick. I didn't tell him I'd sat by the window until the sun went down. Another time, I brought a handmade quilt to the house. I'd been working on it all winter, soft blues and greens, little sailboats stitched along the borders for the boys. Lisa smiled, said thank you, then folded it and placed it in the closet. Weeks later, I saw a store-bought Star Wars comforter on their bed instead. "It's just more their style," Lisa said. That one stung. I didn't say anything. I smiled and offered to do the dishes. I kept smiling even as the temperature inside me dropped by degrees. Once, I picked up the grandkids from school because Lisa had a dentist appointment. When we got home, one of the boys asked, "Why do you always come over if no one wants you to?" He said it without cruelty, like he was genuinely curious. I didn't answer. I just looked out the window and nodded. It wasn't his fault. Children don't invent what they say, they inherit it. It became a pattern. I'd arrive with warm cookies and be asked not to use the oven because of allergies. I'd offer to help with laundry and be told the system was already organised. I'd restock their pantry and later find my selections pushed behind Lisa's preferred brands. Even my scent, vanilla and lavender, was replaced. They used air diffusers now, clean linen and eucalyptus. Spa-like, Lisa called it. I no longer smelled like home to them. One evening, Mark was unusually quiet at dinner. I asked if something was wrong. He sighed, put down his fork and said, "Sometimes it feels like you're always here. Always here." I'd raised him in this very house, sat beside him at this very table, held his hand when he broke his arm, stayed up late sewing a book character costume for 2nd grade, gave up job opportunities, hobbies, friendships, all so he'd never feel alone. And now my presence was a burden. My very existence inconvenient. That night, I walked into the den and shut the door behind me. No one followed. I stared at the walls for a long time. I saw the photos they hadn't taken down but no longer looked at. Me and Robert at Niagara Falls, Mark's kindergarten graduation, a Thanksgiving dinner from 10 years ago, where I'd cooked for 12, smiled for pictures, and didn't sit down until everyone else had finished. There was one more moment, a small thing, but it stuck with me. Lisa mentioned they were repainting the dining room. "We're going for something cleaner, less dated." The wallpaper had been my choice, pale cream with tiny blue violets. I picked it in 1993, after saving for months. It made the room feel like morning, even at night. I nodded. Said it sounded lovely. She didn't ask how I felt about it. Didn't ask if I wanted to keep even a piece. That weekend, I walked into the garage again and found the chair still leaning in the corner. Still broken. Still mine. I sat on an overturned bucket and stared at it. Noticed for the first time the indentation on the armrest where my hand had rested every night. The stitching, loose in one corner, a coffee stain near the leg. Years of quiet presence etched into wood and cloth, and no one cared enough to fix it. That chair was the shape of me, not wanted enough to sit in, not respected enough to repair. I snapped a photo of it with my phone. I didn't know why yet, but it felt important, like proof. Not for them. For me. A woman can survive heartbreak, but the slow theft of her space, her scent, her seat, her voice, that's the wound you learn to live around, until one day you don't. Thanksgiving had always been my day, even when Robert was alive, even when the kids were little, even when I worked part-time at the fabric shop. I made that day sacred. I roasted the turkey from scratch, soaked cranberries overnight, made 3 pies, pumpkin, pecan, and chocolate silk for Mark. The house would smell like memory itself. Last year, Lisa offered to host. I didn't mind. I was getting older and I told myself this was progress, a passing of the torch. Besides, they were doing it at my house. I was still home. But when I arrived that morning, toting my embroidered apron and a glass dish of sweet potato casserole, Lisa barely looked up from her chopping board. "Oh, you didn't have to bring anything," she said. "We've got it all covered." "I've made it every year," I replied, setting the dish gently on the counter. She smiled, tight-lipped. "Well, we'll see if there's room on the table." That should have been the first sign. The grandkids were running around, excited. Mark was basting the turkey, looking tired. The kitchen buzzed with their rhythm, and I stood in the corner like a spare part. No one asked me to stir anything. No one asked for advice. At one point, I reached for the whisk, and Lisa gently took it from my hand. "I've got this," she said, not unkindly, but firmly. It was like being ghosted while standing in your own body. Around 3 p.m, Mark came. Into the den where I was folding napkins. He didn't sit, just lingered near the doorway. "Hey, Mum," small ask. I looked up. "Would you mind eating in here today?" he said, gesturing to the den. "The kids want to spread out, and the dining table's a bit tight this year." I stared at him, thought he was joking, but his face was already apologetic, as if rehearsed. "We just figured it'd be more peaceful for you too." He held out a paper plate. Everyone else had china. I nodded slowly. Took the plate. I didn't argue, didn't cry. Just said, "All right," and sat down on the old love seat by the heater. No one came in to check on me. Not even the kids. Through the wall I heard them laughing, forks clinking, chairs scooting. The sounds of belonging. My casserole never made it to the table. I ate off my lap, staring at the flickering gas heater and the half-dead fern I used to water. Outside, the sky had turned the colour of old denim, soft and blue, but heavy. I wanted to step out onto the porch, but I didn't want anyone to see my face. I placed the empty paper plate on the floor beside me, took off my glasses, rubbed my temples, and something in me cracked. Not loud, not violent, just a slow splitting, like thawing ice, like a string pulled too long. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and put on my coat. "Where are you going?" Lisa asked. "Just out for a walk," I said. My voice sounded so calm I barely recognised it. I walked barefoot down the driveway, across the cold cement. The November air bit at my skin, but I didn't care. I walked past our mailbox, past the trash bins, all the way to the edge of the sidewalk. I stood there, arms folded across my chest, looking up at my own windows, glowing warm behind me. The house didn't feel like mine anymore. The warmth wasn't mine. The laughter inside belonged to someone else. That was the moment, not when he handed me the plate, not when I ate alone. It was that moment, cold, alone, watching my home from the outside, that I realised something had ended. Not just the meal, not just the holiday, but the version of me that would have swallowed it all in silence. That version was gone. When I was a girl, maybe 9 or 10, my mother once gave me a single wrapped chocolate before bedtime. I tried to save it for the next day, but I forgot and left it near the window. The sun melted it into the foil. I remember crying, not because it was ruined, but because I had waited too long to enjoy it. Sometimes I think I've done that with my whole life. Waited too long, sat too still. Have you ever remembered something small, just when everything felt like it was falling apart? Have you ever stayed quiet just to keep the peace? They thought they were giving me a kindness, space, peace, ease, but what they handed me was something else entirely, a mirror. And I saw myself in it for the first time, not as a mother or a wife, but as a woman no one had set a place for. I didn't say anything the next day or the day after. I answered texts with short replies. Sounds good. Okay. Hope it went well. Mark didn't notice, or maybe he did and chose not to ask. That was our way, polite neglect. Lisa sent a message about leftover pie. I said no, thank you. She added a thumbs-up reaction. Moved through the house like a visitor, not an owner. Rooms I once cleaned with care now felt hollow. My apron still hung behind the pantry door. I hadn't touched it since Thanksgiving. I couldn't. Instead, I cleaned in silence. Not to prepare, not to serve, but to clear a space in myself. I wiped windows, pulled weeds from the garden bed, and sorted through drawers no one else had opened in years. In the far back of the linen closet, I found a baby blanket, Mark's, hand-stitched pale green with white edging. I held it to my chest and stood there for what felt like hours. How had we gone from, "Please don't leave, Mama," to "Please don't eat with us"? There was no confrontation, no apology, no outburst, just a growing distance like fog rising between hills. A few days later, I drove to the grocery store and past a realtor's office. On impulse, I pulled in. A woman greeted me. Her name was Charlotte. Kind eyes. Didn't rush. "I'm not selling," I told her. "I just want to know what it might be worth." She nodded. "We can do that." She didn't ask why. That mattered. The next morning, I walked through the house with a notebook, made a list of what needed fixing, paint touch-ups, squeaky doors, the loose stair rail. It was the first time in years I moved through the house with intention, not as caretaker, not as mother, but as someone planning a next step. I opened closets, pulled down old photo albums, sorted what to keep and what to let go. There was a strange comfort in that silence, not the kind that isolates, but the kind that answers back. One morning, I stepped into the kitchen and saw the light falling across, the tile, golden, pure. I reached for my old apron still hanging on its peg. I didn't put it on. I folded it once, then again, and laid it on the counter. I didn't say a word. I stood there unmoving as the light shifted and danced over the folded cloth. The fridge hummed. A bird chirped somewhere outside. No one was. Watching. That's what made it matter. A few days later, I opened a shoebox I hadn't touched since Robert died. It held insurance forms, a few letters, and a small digital recorder. Inside, it was a voicemail. I remembered this. It had come just before his passing, when he was in the hospital and I'd been home too tired to answer. I never played it. Couldn't bear to hear his voice after he was gone. I sat down and hit play. "Hey, it's me. I know you're probably running around, but I just wanted to say, don't let anyone make you feel small in that house. You built every inch of it. Don't forget that. Ever." Click. That was it. 22 seconds. But it landed like a stone in still water. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it in a folder on my desktop. Not to hold on to the grief, but to hold on to the truth. That voice, long gone, had reminded me of something I'd forgotten. This house was mine, not theirs. Lisa called later that week. We were thinking of bringing the kids by for cocoa on Saturday. I looked out the window. The rosebush by the fence had bloomed late this year. That won't work, I said gently. I've got plans. A pause. Oh, what kind? I let the quiet stretch between us like thread. Just plans, I said, and I had them, even if they weren't set in stone. Even if they were just seedlings in my mind. I started a small folder on my kitchen table labelled Move. Inside it, the real estate flyer I'd pulled from the fridge, a rough list of coastal towns and a single photo, me and Mark on the porch swing, years ago. That swing no longer stood. It had rotted and been removed last summer. No one had mentioned it, but I kept the photo. I wasn't erasing the past, just stepping out from underneath it. That Saturday, I sat on the back steps with a mug of tea. No one came by, no one called, and still, I felt a strange peace, because silence, when chosen, isn't. Absence. It's clarity. The house hadn't changed, but I had. And in the stillness, I could finally hear the one voice I'd ignored for too long, my own. It came in the mail. A thin, white envelope tucked among circulars and a coupon for canned soup. I almost didn't notice it, plain, official-looking, stamped with a law firm's name I didn't recognise. At first I thought it might be some lingering paperwork from Robert's estate. There was always some new document they wanted, proof of this, signature for that. But this was different. Inside was a notarised deed change from the year before. Mark's name was on it, alongside mine, joint ownership. I read it 3 times, blinking to make sure I hadn't misunderstood. He had added himself to the property title while I was in the hospital after a bad fall last winter. I'd been on pain medication, barely conscious, trusting that the bills and logistics were being managed in good faith. Apparently, one of the forms I signed wasn't medical. My hand began to tremble. I sat down on the edge of the bed, the letter dangling between my fingers like it weighed more than paper should. Joint ownership. Technically, it meant I couldn't sell the house without his consent, not without a legal challenge. I stared at the walls, the wallpaper with the tiny violets, now partially torn where they'd started repainting. The pale green trim I had once painted myself. Had he planned this, or had he just helped himself? Either way, it changed everything. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, the house silent except for the soft buzz of the fridge in the kitchen. I thought about confronting him, demanding answers, but the thought exhausted me. I didn't want a fight. I wanted truth. So instead, I opened my laptop. I searched the deed transfer process in our state, reviewed every legal term. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the digital voice recorder again, the one that held Robert's final voicemail. You built every inch of it. Don't forget that. Ever. His voice didn't shake. It didn't plead. It reminded. I closed my eyes, pressed my palm to my chest and whispered aloud for the first time. He took what was mine. The next day I drove to the title office. I asked questions. I took notes. I made copies. I wasn't sure what my next move would be, but I wasn't going to sit quietly and let myself be erased. Later that week, Mark dropped by unannounced. That was rare. He sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once fed him alphabet soup and cut his sandwich crusts into hearts. "Mum," he said, "Lisa and I were talking. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed, just say so. The house. The upkeep. We can help you manage things." He said it like he was offering kindness, like he hadn't quietly written his name across my front door. I slid the envelope across the table. He didn't touch it. "I know," I said calmly. "I know about the deed." He looked away, exhaled. "I thought we were protecting the family's future." "Without asking me." "You were sick. We weren't sure you'd come home." I nodded slowly, not angry, not loud, just clear. "But I did come home," I said. "And I came back to a house that now has your name on it, and a family that treats me like a guest. He said nothing. I stood up and opened the cabinet, pulled down a mug. Not the white ceramic ones Lisa brought, but my chipped navy one. Best Mom, 1994. I poured coffee into it and sat back down. I'm not angry, I told him, but I won't be quiet. Later that day, I opened the photo I'd taken weeks ago, the broken dining chair in the garage. My chair, the one they discarded without mention. I printed it, taped it above my desk, next to the real estate flyer. Let it speak for what words? Couldn't. That night, I emailed Charlotte, the realtor with kind eyes. I told her the truth. There's a second name on the deed. But I want to sell anyway. She responded within the hour. It's complicated, but not impossible. Let's talk. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I did the dishes, lit a candle, sat in my own silence and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. Not revenge, not rage, just a quiet, rooted knowing. I will not be erased. He thought he'd made it harder for me to leave, but all he did was prove it was time. Because no matter whose name was on the paper, this house would never belong to someone who couldn't see the woman who built it. Section 8. I tried to rebuild quietly. 1,150 words. The hardest part wasn't deciding to leave. It was doing it in silence. No announcement, no drama, no list of grievances posted on the fridge or shouted across the dinner table. Just a shift, like the tide pulling back so slowly you don't even realise the shoreline has changed until your feet are dry. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't tell Lisa. I just started. Charlotte came by on a Thursday morning, clipboard in hand, her shoes soft on the hardwood I'd waxed for 40 years. She didn't flinch at the wallpaper or the creaking steps. She asked thoughtful questions and took notes while I made tea. We spoke plainly. She said, "If we list it, we'll need both signatures, yours and your son's." I looked out the window, watching 2 squirrels scurry across the fence. "What? If I list it anyway?" She paused. "Then it sends a signal. One he'll have to answer." That was fine with me. I was done waiting for permission to live my life. I began packing in small increments. Nothing dramatic, just one drawer at a time. I made 3 piles. Keep, donate, let go. The keep pile was smaller than I expected. A few framed photos. My mother's locket. That chipped navy mug. I found a blue silk scarf I hadn't worn in years, still smelling faintly of lilac. I wrapped it around my neck one morning, just to see how it felt. It felt like remembering, not just who I used to be, but who I might still become. The first room I cleared was the laundry room. Funny in a way, it had always been my sanctuary. A place where no one interrupted me, where my hands moved without thought. Now it felt like a confessional. I stood there holding one of Mark's old shirts, still folded from the last time I'd tried to return it to him. I pressed it once against my cheek. Then I placed it in the donate bag, some memories I wasn't ready to release. The porch swing photo, for instance, me and Mark 1,000,000 years ago, laughing so hard our eyes disappeared into our cheeks. I placed it in a folder marked for later, because some things don't belong to the past or the future. They just belong to you. Lisa texted that week. "Hey, we were thinking of repainting the garage. Any chance you're around to help sort the storage bins?" I stared at the message for a full minute, then typed, "I'm focusing on other things. Right now. Hope it goes well." No apology. No explanation. It was the smallest sentence I'd ever written. And the loudest. Mark stopped by unexpectedly, walked into the kitchen like he used to. But now it felt like a stranger visiting a shrine. "Mum, are you okay?" I nodded. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure." He looked around at the neatly stacked boxes in the hallway. His brow furrowed, but he didn't ask. Instead, he said, "The kids have a recital next week. Thought you might want to come." "Thank you," I said. "I'll think about it." I meant it. I wasn't punishing him. I was just choosing. for the first time in years. Later that evening, I walked into the garage and stared at the chair, still broken, still leaning in the corner. Printed a second copy of the photo, taped it to the box marked, "Garage, do not move, let it stay there." As a kind of quiet monument, Charlotte emailed with a listing draft and a suggested price. "It's a fair offer for what the house means today," she said. I looked at the numbers. Then at the front porch. The step Robert repaired after that. Rainstorm in '98. The spot under the tree where Mark fell off his bike. I didn't cry. I nodded. Let's do it. A few days later, the listing went live. Charlotte had found a legal angle that allowed the listing without full consent, technically provisional, pending co-owner response. But it was enough to start. Enough to make it real. I didn't check the page over and over. I didn't wait for offers. I just kept packing. One draw, one decision, one boundary at a time. No shouting. No ultimatums. Just quiet action. Some mornings I would light a candle and sit on the back steps with my tea. The wind would move gently through the trees. The world didn't ask anything of me in those moments, and I didn't give it more than I chose. I bought a small notebook. On the front, "What now?" Inside, I wrote lists, things I wanted to learn, watercolour, Spanish, how to make sourdough bread, places I wanted to visit, Astoria, Santa Fe, a lavender farm in Virginia, things I missed, long walks alone, sleeping in the middle of the bed, laughing without checking if someone else found it funny too. I wasn't running away, I was stepping out, from under the weight of expectations, from the shadow of being needed but never seen. They thought I wouldn't move unless they moved me. But I already had. The first offer came in 3 days after the listing went live, a retired couple from North Carolina. They saw the photos online and said it looked like a home that had been loved. That phrase made me sit down for a while. Not because it hurt, but because it didn't. Not anymore. Charlotte forwarded the paperwork, and I opened it slowly, like it might still bite. But it didn't. It just moved things forward. Then, the call started, Mark first. "Mum," he said, his voice flat. "What is this?" I didn't pretend not to know. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said. "The house is listed." "You didn't even talk to me." I let out a quiet breath. "You didn't talk to me when you signed your name onto my title." Silence, then. "That was different, we thought—" "No," I said gently. "You decided, I just followed." He paused. "Why are you doing this now?" "I'm not doing this now, Mark," I said. "You just didn't notice when I started." Lisa called 2 days later. Her voice was calm but clipped, like she was trying very hard to keep the conversation civil. We would have appreciated a heads up. I could hear a blender in the background, the sound of her life continuing unaffected. "I'm sure you would have," I said. She asked if I'd be moving far. I told her I hadn't decided yet. That part was true. "Well, the kids will miss you," she said. It sounded more like a question than a statement. I found the old brass key in my nightstand drawer, the one Robert had cut for me the first year we moved in, back when Mark was still small, and we believed a house could fix anything if you just filled it with enough effort. I held it in my palm, warm from memory. Later that day, I slid it into a padded envelope. No note, just the key. I left it on Mark's front porch. Let him feel its weight. I thought he might show up angry, that he'd bang on the door and demand I reconsider. But when he came by that Friday afternoon, he looked more tired than anything else. He didn't even come in, just stood on the porch like a man waiting to be let into a past that no longer had room for him. "Where will you go?" he asked. I smiled, not unkindly. "Somewhere I don't have to ask where to sit." He looked down, nodded once. There was something in his eyes that almost looked like shame, but not the kind that changes a person. The kind they carry like a backpack too proud to take off. "I didn't mean to hurt you," he said. "I know," I said, "but you still did." That weekend, I finished packing the guest room. Not because I had a destination in mind yet, but because I knew I wouldn't be staying. Some things don't need final answers, just first steps. I donated the rocking chair, kept the blue scarf, folded the porch swing photo into a book of pressed violets. I didn't want it to sit alone in a box. It had given me comfort. Now it could rest. I kept one more thing, the voicemail from Robert. You built every inch of it. Don't forget that. Ever. I saved it to a flash drive, not because I needed the reminder, but because someday, someone else might. The neighbours stopped by when they saw the sign, asked if I was downsizing. I told them I was right-sizing. They smiled politely, not sure what I meant. But I did. I wasn't shrinking. I was finally fitting into my own life. Charlotte came by with more papers. I signed them in blue ink, watched her place them in a folder. Crisp and final. You're remarkably calm, she said. I used to be a storm inside, I replied. Now I'm just the air after. That night I stood in the dining room. The new paint job, neutral grey, made the room look cleaner but colder. Lisa's touch. I walked out to the garage one more time. The chair was still there. I didn't touch it, didn't move it. I took the second copy of the photo I'd printed, the one of the chair, and taped it to the wall above it. Then I turned off the light. Left it there. Like a gravestone. People often mistake silence for surrender. But silence is also strategy. It's healing. It's the sound of a woman gathering her breath before taking up space she was never allowed to claim. I slept well that night, not because everything was solved, but because I was no longer waiting to be seen. They thought I'd stay broken. But they didn't understand. I was never broken, just buried beneath the weight of what everyone else needed me to be. And now I was finally standing up. I didn't plan to go back, not for any grand farewell or dramatic speech. I had no interest in last words. But one afternoon I found a small cardboard box tucked behind the linen closet. It held a few odds and ends I knew Mark might want. His high school yearbooks, a faded trophy from a science fair, and a crumpled drawing he made in second grade. Me, smiling, with a crown on my head. Queen of the house, it said. I stared at that piece of paper for a long time. It didn't make me cry, but it did make me ache, so I packed it neatly with the rest and decided to bring it over myself. No message, no request to talk, just return what was never mine to keep. The sun was low when I pulled into their driveway. Late afternoon, the sky brushed in pinks and oranges. I knocked lightly. Lisa answered, surprised. Oh, hi, she said, her voice laced with practiced friendliness. Mark's in the garage. I nodded. I'll just leave this with him. She stepped aside without another word. The house was quieter than usual. No cartoons blaring, no sounds of dinner or squabbling kids. Just the hum of a dishwasher somewhere deep in the kitchen. I found Mark standing beside the workbench, tightening bolts on a child's bike. He didn't look up at first. Just said, "Didn't expect you. I brought some things you might want." I set the box down beside him. He looked over, his hands falling still. "What's in it?" "Pieces of before," I said. "Thought you should decide what to do with them." He opened the lid, rifled through the contents. When his fingers landed on the drawing, I saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. "I remember this," he said softly. "I thought you'd thrown all this stuff away." "No, I saved what mattered." He nodded once, said nothing. I looked around. The garage was more organised now, bins neatly labelled, tools hanging like soldiers on the wall. Lisa's influence, no doubt, but the old blue bin with holiday lights still sat crooked in the corner. A small thing out of place. A memory that refused to be tidied. "Are you sure about this?" he asked suddenly. "About leaving?" I turned to him slowly. "I was sure the day you handed me a paper plate and told me I'd be more comfortable eating alone." He winced. "It wasn't meant like that." But that's what it became. He exhaled, looked down at his hands. "I didn't know you." Felt so unwanted. I gave him a long look. "You didn't want to know." We stood there in silence. Not angry, not tender, just aware. Two people holding a space between them that used to be filled with stories, scraped knees, and late night cereal bowls. Now it was filled with years of small neglects and one deep truth: love without presence isn't love at all. I thought we were doing what was best, he said, his voice low. For who? I asked. He didn't answer. I reached into the box and pulled out the photo from the porch swing, the one where we were both laughing, his hand resting in mine, like it had always belonged there. I placed it on the workbench. You were kind once, I said. You saw me. You wanted me near. I don't know when that changed, but I kept showing up because I thought if I gave enough, you'd come back. He swallowed hard, looked like he wanted to speak, but didn't know how. I nodded gently, giving him permission not to. I'm not angry anymore, Mark, I said. But I'm not staying where I'm no longer welcome. He finally met my eyes. Are you leaving because of me? I gave a sad smile. I'm leaving because of me. I turned to go. My hand touched the doorknob. He said nothing. I said nothing, but as I walked out, I heard the faint sound of something being placed gently on the bench, wood on wood. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. Sometimes silence tells you everything. The drive home was quiet. No music. Just the thrum of tires and the rush of wind through a cracked window. For the first time in a long time, I felt no guilt. No urge to fix. No ache to be forgiven. Only release. Later that evening, I lit a candle and placed the porch swing photo back into its folder. I didn't cry. I simply whispered thank you to the woman in that picture. She had stayed long enough. Now it was time for her to go. He didn't follow me, didn't ask me to stay. And in that silence, I finally found an answer I'd spent years waiting to hear. You're free now. A week passed without a call. Then 2. The house remained listed. The paperwork moved forward. I sorted through the last of my linens and wrapped the final framed photographs in tissue. I hadn't picked a new place yet, but I knew I wouldn't stay through another winter. Then, on a quiet Wednesday morning, my phone rang. It was Lisa. Mark's been different lately, she said, her voice softer than I'd heard it in years. Quiet. Off. I waited. She hesitated. He told me about the deed, about how he added his name without telling you. I closed my eyes. That was a choice. I didn't know he'd done that, she said quickly. I swear. I believed. Her? Lisa had many faults, but deception wasn't one of them. Then she said something that surprised me. He's scared, you know. I didn't speak. He said you used to be the one place that made him feel steady, that even when Robert was harsh, even when school was hard, he could count on you, that you were safe. My throat tightened, not from sadness, from the strange disorientation of hearing truth echo from someone you never expected. She continued. He's not sure how to be that for anyone now, not even our kids. It struck me then. I'd spent my whole life trying to keep everyone else from falling apart. I hadn't realised they'd built themselves around the shape of my sacrifice, and when I stepped away, even gently, it left a hole they didn't know how to fill. That evening, Mark showed up at my door. Not unannounced. Not angry, just quiet. He didn't come inside right away. Just stood at the threshold like a boy waiting for permission to return to a room he'd once belonged in. Can I sit? He asked. I nodded. Led him to the porch, where 2 old chairs faced the yard. The air was cool, the light soft. He held something in his hands. I saw it before he spoke. A drawing. The same one from the box I'd left. Me in a crown, holding a ladle like a scepter. I found this again, he said, his voice uneven. And I realised I don't remember the last time I made you feel like this. I didn't respond. I wasn't there to make him feel better. I thought if I just took over, managed everything, I'd protect what we had. The house, the family. I didn't realise I was writing you out of it. There it was. The truth. Small, clumsy, but real. I was never angry that you needed to protect things, I said. I was angry that you didn't think I could protect myself. He nodded slowly. You were always the strong one, even when I didn't know it. I looked out toward the hydrangea bushes, now withered into their winter husks. Strength doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means knowing when to leave. He shifted in his seat. I want to fix it. I turned to him gently. It's not about fixing it anymore, Mark. It's about accepting that it changed. He looked down, held the drawing tighter. For a moment, I saw him not as the man who'd dismissed me, not as the boy I raised, but as a child again, a man who had built a life around quiet fears. Fear of failing, fear of not knowing how to lead, fear that, if I ever stopped being the centre, the whole thing would fall apart. He hadn't pushed me out because he didn't care. He pushed me out because he didn't know how to include someone who made him feel small by comparison. But I'd never wanted to be the queen of the house. I just wanted to be seen in it. I'll sign the papers, he said. For the house. If it makes this easier. I smiled faintly. It doesn't make it easy. It makes it clean. He nodded again, then placed the drawing between us and stood to leave. He didn't ask if I'd change my mind, and I didn't offer that I might. Visit someday. Some truths don't need promises, just presence. That night, I walked through each room one more time. I stood in the kitchen, lit a candle, and whispered, "Goodbye." Then I stepped into the den, the one they'd once asked me to eat in, and stood in the exact spot I'd sat, on Thanksgiving Day. For a moment, I saw myself there again, holding that paper plate. But this time, I wasn't ashamed. That moment didn't break me. It revealed me. I took out the voicemail one last time. Played it slowly, Robert's voice warm and clear. You built every inch of it. Don't forget that. Ever. Then I hit delete. Not out of bitterness. But because I didn't need proof anymore, I was my own witness now. I didn't need his apology to move forward. But I took it, not as permission, as closure, because sometimes the truth doesn't heal what was broken. It simply lets you walk away without carrying it anymore. The house sold quietly. No bidding war, no balloons or banners, just a signature, a wire transfer, and a polite handshake on the front porch with the couple from North Carolina. They were kind people. He was a retired school principal. She was a nurse who smiled with her whole face. We can feel it, she said, resting her palm against the doorway. This house has good bones. I smiled. It does. She's held a lot. They didn't ask about the broken chair in the garage. They didn't need to. Some things aren't meant to be explained. I left early on a Monday morning. No farewell dinner, no gathering. Just one last walk through the empty rooms. The walls echoed now. Every step sounded louder, like the house was finally exhaling after all those years. In the kitchen, I placed one item on the counter, my chipped navy mug. Best Mom, 1994. Not as a gesture of forgiveness, but as a quiet reminder of who I had been, and who I had finally stopped trying to be for everyone else. My new place wasn't grand. A small 2-bedroom rental in a town where people waved to you without knowing your name. The kind of town where porches mattered, and silence wasn't awkward. It was peace. I bought a second-hand table, round and small, just for me. No leaf extensions. No need for 10 chairs. Just one for me, and maybe one for someone kind someday. I hung no family photos on the wall, not out of anger, just intention. This chapter was mine. Entirely. Some evenings, I sat on the porch and watched gulls move over the water like scattered notes in a song I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. I wrote poems in a spiral notebook. None of them rhymed. Most of them weren't very good. But they were mine. I volunteered at the library, learned the names of the local bakery women, took a watercolour class on Thursday mornings with a woman named Fran, who cursed like a sailor but painted like a saint. My world got smaller but deeper. Mark called once a week, then every other, never to ask for anything, just to talk. It was awkward at first, like trying to stitch together two fabrics that had been torn too far apart. But I let him speak, and when he listened, really listened, I let him stay on the line. He asked if he and the kids could visit sometime. I told him gently, maybe one day. Not yet. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting what I had finally begun to grow. He said he understood, and I believed him. One evening, I took out the drawing he'd left on the porch, the one with me in the crown. I had it framed, hung it in the hallway beside a new mirror. I didn't want to forget who I'd been, but I also wanted to greet who I was becoming. People assume walking away is about revenge. That silence is retaliation. But I never wanted them to hurt the way I had. What I wanted was to stop bleeding just to keep others warm. Revenge burns, but dignity endures. I didn't want my son to feel what I had felt, unseen, discarded, unnecessary. I just wanted him to know he couldn't own what he didn't honour, and now maybe he did. I never told anyone where I kept Robert's last voicemail, not even Charlotte. I tucked the flash drive into a ceramic dish on my dresser, beside a seashell I'd found on my first walk down the shore. Sometimes I touched it in passing, like a thread to an old world I no longer lived in but still respected. Hadn't erased the past. I'd just stopped dragging it into every new room I entered. One morning, I walked down to the local cafe and ordered a slice of lemon cake with my coffee. A woman at the next table glanced at me and said, "Are you new around here?" I smiled. "Not new, just beginning." She nodded. Didn't ask more. And that was perfect, because when you've spent your life trying to prove you belong, there's something holy about simply being. I went home, washed my plate, and placed it back in the cupboard. Porcelain, not paper. The kind of plate you choose. For yourself, the kind you don't hand to someone who sees you as an inconvenience. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you believe quiet dignity is stronger than revenge? I didn't burn the house down. I turned off the lights, closed the door behind me, and walked into something softer, a life no one built for. Me. A seat I didn't have to earn. A table where I never had to ask where I belonged. They say memory is a room you carry inside you, and sometimes I still open doors I thought I'd locked for good. A cupboard handle. The creak of a floorboard. A certain way the afternoon light falls through curtains. These small things bring it all back, not in pain anymore, but in texture. The texture of a life lived mostly in service, then slowly, finally, in selfhood. Used to believe love was sacrifice. And maybe it is for a time. But sacrifice without recognition corrodes into something else. Silence that poisons, smiles that feel like masks, a loyalty that starts to taste like rust. I loved my son. I still do. But loving someone doesn't mean shrinking for them, and being a mother does not mean being the invisible scaffolding holding up a house no one thanks you for building. Some mornings, I still reach for the chipped mug, forgetting it's gone. Then I choose another, one I bought myself, white porcelain with a thin silver rim. It feels heavier but stronger, like I imagine I must look now. At the library they call me Miss Ellie. They don't know what I gave up. They only know what I bring now, recommendations for cosy mysteries, stories read aloud with warmth, a quiet kind of presence. No one expects casseroles from me. No one hands me paper plates. I sit at every table as an equal. Or not at all. I think often about that broken chair in the garage, how it stood there all those months, unattended, unclaimed, unfixed. There's a part of me that used to wish someone would have noticed, would have said, "Let me repair that. It's yours after all." But now, I see the gift in it. Because that chair was never meant to be mended. It was meant to be left behind. I still remember that porch swing photo. The way we laughed. The way Mark held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. That moment was real. And it's mine forever. But moments, like people, change. And sometimes the kindest thing we can do is stop asking old moments to prove themselves in the present. I'll never again make myself smaller to keep the peace, or accept silence as kindness, or wait for someone to ask me how I'm really doing. I ask myself now, and I answer. Not long ago, I stood on the beach at sunrise. The horizon burned in streaks of lavender and gold, the air still cool from the night. I thought of Robert's voice, steady, tired, still loving in his own way. I thought of the house, how it held me, and how it hollowed me. I thought of Mark, his trembling voice, his slow awakening. I thought of the woman I had been for so long, a silent servant in a story she didn't get to write, and I thought of who I am now, not the queen of a household, not the keeper of other people's comfort. Just Ellie, still here, still strong, still learning. When you give everything, people forget you have needs. When you say yes for decades, your first no feels like betrayal. But when you finally say enough, you begin to hear the softest sound, the one you forgot to listen for. Your own voice. I used to say, some plates don't break. They just quietly disappear from the table. But I see it differently now. I didn't disappear. I was never the plate. I was the hands that set the table, the warmth in the food, the stillness in the room, the dignity in the quiet. And now, I'm building a table of my own, small, sturdy, enough. I wasn't the broken chair in the garage. I was the house, quiet, built to last, and finally mine.